What are some of the common themes?
Yeah, I mean, each of the five families who I followed over several years, to write this book, they all have really singular, really distinctive stories and journeys. But I think what comes through really clearly is the common denominator that the reason so many people are becoming homeless in this country is because they don't have access to housing they can afford. And, the term working homeless really demands that we confront not just the homeless side of that equation, but the working side as well. These are people who are working and working and working some more. And it's not just that their wages are too low, although there's certainly that as well. It's that the very nature of work has changed for millions of Americans. It's become ever more volatile, insecure. People don't know how many hours they're going to be working from one week to the next. Celeste, that woman who I just talked about, whose house burned down, she was later diagnosed with ovarian and breast cancer, and she was having to choose: do I go to my warehouse job or do I go to my chemo treatment? Because if I miss a shift at work, I don't get paid. And then me and my kids go from being in this squalid extended stay hotel room to being on the street. So that it's not just wages, it's not just rents, it's that the nature of work and really the nature of housing, a lack of basic tenant rights and tenant protections that has caused homelessness to rise to the highest level in recorded history.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a perfect storm that spells disaster for these families because you have years of wage stagnation, years of attacks on unions, it fits in with the conversations we've been having about deindustrialization and, the fact that it is so difficult to earn a living wage in this country. And then you add to that skyrocketing rents, skyrocketing housing costs, and you have utter disaster for so many families that are trying to do everything right, they're working hard, they're trying to, follow the playbook of how you get ahead in America, and it just doesn't work for so many people now. I was curious as I was reading the book. I'm sure you've been watching some of the discourse about the abundance agenda and how one of the factors that has led to housing unaffordability is too many onerous zoning regulations and the way that's limited construction or made it so that it's there's less affordable housing available. I just was curious, based on your reporting with these individuals and the dynamics that go into the housing market, how much of a fix some of that you think really would be?
Yeah, I mean, I take a kind of ecumenical approach to solutions and how we can finally solve this mounting catastrophe. I think we need a kind of both and approach. But I do think that simply like deregulating the market, letting the market do its thing, cutting the red tape, and really allowing the private market to sort of provide for the housing needs of Americans who need it is not adequate. I think what some of that discourse maybe leaves out is power, the question of power: who has it, who doesn't have it, the immense power asymmetry that exists in this country between the renter class and those who are fortunate enough to own property and to be landlords. And also, I think what's missing is just how incredibly profitable all this insecurity has become, not just for, NIMBY homeowners who don't want an affordable housing complex built near their, neighborhood, but how profitable it's become for some of the most influential and powerful Wall Street firms in this country. I was absolutely shocked to discover that at every step in these families' journeys, the five families who I follow in this book, there were entire business models designed to capitalize on their precarity. And that's not only the private equity firms like Celeste Landlord, who are buying up vast swaths of America's rental housing and really making that housing much, much more insecure, pushing people out through these automated eviction systems and algorithms that determine, that someone just gets an eviction filing if they're 2 days late on their rent and there's no human to interact with. Not only pushing people out of their housing, but increasingly buying up the very sites and places where families and individuals are pushed into once they become homeless. And nowhere is that truer than with this phenomenon of extended stay hotels. It's an entire world of homelessness that we're not seeing. And, during the pandemic, Blackstone and Starwood Capital, these two private equity giants, they saw that extended stay America was raking in hundreds of millions of dollars while all other hotels were at like zero occupancy. And they spent $6 billion buying this chain because they saw that these hotels are concentrated in areas of our country where working people are most likely to become homeless and to lose stable housing. And so you have entire business models, very powerful business models that are actively exacerbating and really profiting off of this insecurity.
Are there examples of communities or policies that have dealt with this in a constructive way? Are there, things that we can point to and say, look, this does work. This community used it, to some success. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like, if we really open the lens on this crisis, and, one of the big things I'm trying to show in the book is that the official numbers on homelessness, as bad as they are, and again, we had over the last 2 years, the highest level of homelessness on record. As bad as those official numbers are, the reality is actually much, much worse. It's exponentially worse. And I estimate that the actual number is roughly 6 times that of the official number. And the reason I say that is because once we get a sense of the true severity and magnitude, and crucially, the actual root causes of this homelessness catastrophe, we realize that the kind of nibbling around the edges solutions that are often floated will simply not be enough. And a huge thing is keeping people in the homes they already have. And, I think I've been disabused in the process of reporting this book of the notion that if this is solved, it's going to be because some policymaker in Washington or at state level wakes up and is like, I'm going to ease the suffering for these people. Some of the most promising trends that we're seeing is the emergence of a really powerful and vibrant tenant rights movement across the country. People organizing in their buildings, in their rental properties, and saying, this is intolerable. We're not going to stand for it. And in cities like Kansas City, we had the emergence of KC Tenants over the last several years that has demanded large-scale policy shifts. And I think that's the most promising thing we have right now, that this is going, if solutions come, they're going to come from those who are closest to the problem and those who are directly impacted, and their neighbors who simply say, we're not going to allow millions of people to be the casualties of our city's renaissance, of our city's success and growth, because that's another dynamic. All of these people are losing their housing, not in the midst of poverty, but in the midst of mounting prosperity in cities like Atlanta, Nashville. So that's really what I see as most hopeful right now.
Yeah, because you have this mass inequality too, where, in these cities, you need the people who are going to work at McDonald's, who are going to do the Uber Eats or the DoorDash. You need, given that's the economic system we apparently have, you need that working class, but you increasingly have completely priced them out of housing. And then you don't have, I know Atlanta is notorious for not having sufficient public transit also, so that people can actually, conveniently commute in. And, speaking to some of that gentrification aspect, one of the families, I'm blanking on the name of the woman that you focus on, one of them had lived previously and grown up in Atlanta in a public housing project, and actually have very fond memories of that public housing project and what life was like there. Those were demolished. And then I believe what happened is they built some replacement that was mixed income housing, but never sufficient to replace the number of units that had previously been lost. And so I wonder what we can learn from that dynamic in the way that, this kind of well-intentioned reform movement ultimately exacerbated the issue of, a housing crisis for people in the city.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think through Britt's story, Britt is the name of the person that you were just referencing. Through her story, I mean, you kind of get American housing policy in the life of one single family, one single individual. And like you said, she grew up in public housing. She was determined to make Atlanta her home, to make a home for herself and her kids in the city. And she has this line this city is just as much mine as anyone's. I'm not going anywhere. But the title of the book comes from Britt. There is no place for us, because she realizes that this city that she's given everything to, Britt works at the airport when the book begins. She's working at a place that's like the pride and joy of Atlanta's economy.